This is getting more and more complicated as we go. It's almost impossible to remember all of this in one shot. But what's important is that you're getting to know how many amazing things are possible with grid. Someday, when you face a challenging layout, you will at least think, hey, I've seen that this layout is possible with grid. If not, I exactly know how to do this. So let's continue. We're now going back to the very first example we saw in this series, the services section. Let's look at the code. If you remember, this is how we made the section responsive. Single column for mobile layout, 2 columns beyond 480 pixels and 3 columns beyond 720 pixels. Before we learn something new here, I'd like to change a couple of things. In the very first episode, we did not know anything about the gap property, so I had added this padding to individual div items. Let me remove that now and add double the gap. We had a padding of 1.2 rem on top and bottom, so we would need double that, 2.4 rem of a gap, and also we'd need to double the padding within the section. And now we also know how to create multiple columns of the same size without using percentages. We can use the fractional units, 1FR, 1FR, or let me use the repeat function, repeat to 1FR. Let's change this to repeat 3, 1FR. Does it still look the same? Yes, exactly how it was before. Now what if I told you that we can replace all of these lines here with a single rule and still achieve the same result and make it responsive as well? You don't believe me? Let me show you. For our mobile screen size, we haven't specified any columns because by default, it's one single column, grid template columns, repeat 1 FR if you have to write it like this. So if you carefully observe, the only thing we are changing within the media queries is this number of columns. Let me comment out all of these for now, and instead of 1 FR, let me specify a fixed value like say 12 rem. That's wide enough for a single service div. Now based on this width, if there was a way to determine how many items can fit in one single row, we're all set. And there is such a value in grid. That is the auto fit keyword. Let's see what we have now. View this in responsive mode. This isn't perfect yet, but can you see? We didn't use any media queries at all to specify how many columns we need at what screen size, but still in mobile layout we have 1 column, slightly wider we have 2, and then we have 3 columns. So what we're saying here is automatically fit as many items in one row as you can, each of the items being 12 rem wide each. Alright, now what about this additional space here? This is not wide enough to fit another 12 rem item, so how can we specify that when there's not enough space for an additional column, increase these column sizes to occupy the remaining space? Remember the min-max value we just learned? All we want is this column to be at least 12 rem wide and otherwise occupy the rest of the space. So we can use the min-max function to specify 12 rem as the minimum and 1 FR as the maximum. Now let's see. Perfect. Resize. This is great. We don't have any additional space now. And we just created a responsive grid layout without using any media queries at all. This rule will come in handy for you every time you need a responsive layout like this. With blog posts, products, images, or any such items, you can directly copy this rule and paste it and only change this value here to suit your content. Next, we have another value very similar to AutoFit, which is best explained with a different example. Consider this section with some statistics. We have small blocks displayed in a grid fashion, and this is, of course, responsive. As you can see. Here's the markup section with 7 or 8 divs, and here's the normal flow without grid. Let's use the concept we just learned to achieve a responsive grid layout with a single rule. But first, let's turn the section into a grid container, display grid, also add some gap, let's say about 1.6 rem, and then the magical rule, grid template columns, repeat, auto fit, min max. Don't worry if you cannot remember this in one go, even I couldn't. This takes a lot of practice. And here is a minimum value. Let's leave it a question mark for now and then 1 FR. This is all you have to change, 10 rem. Okay, let's see if we got it right. And perfect. Responsive mode also looks great. Now let's assume these stats are dynamically fetched from the backend and we don't know how many of them we get. We have 7 of them here, but sometimes we could have only 2. Let's see what happens when we have just 2 items. Comment out 5 items. And now these blocks stretch to occupy the remaining space, right? It's not desirable in this example. I don't want this block to stretch. In such a case, instead of auto fit, we can use another similar keyword, autofill. Now let's see. Great, it's not expanding, but let's inspect and see what's happening. Click on grid to see the grid lines. On smaller screens, the behavior is the same. But once it gets wider, do you see what just happened? At this screen size, there is space for another 10 rem item, so it created another column though we don't have another item. That's what autofill does. If we replace autofill with autofit, that's not what happens. So autofill adds additional columns if there is space available, whether or not there are more items available. Usually we use the autofit value, but in layouts similar to this example, autofill is useful as well.